If someone else's carelessness caused your injury, you want to know how long it's going to take to settle your case. There's many factors that can affect the time it takes to settle. In this video, I'm going to show you real settlements, and I'm going to show you how many of these factors affected the time it took to settle these cases. I'm also going to show you some things that may decrease the time it takes to settle your case. Stay tuned and watch the entire video so you can see all of these settlements and all of these factors that affected the time it took to settle these cases. JZ Helps of Florida Injury Law Firm. Most personal injury cases settle. However, there's no guarantee that your case settles at all. So this entire video assumes that your case actually has value that would warrant the settlement. If there's more insurance coverage available than the value of your case, this could prolong and take longer time to settle the case. This is because the insurance company has less pressure on them to settle the case because they'll likely be able to settle it within the limits, as opposed to if your case is worth more than the insurance company limits, there's the chance that if you were to get a verdict for higher than the insurance company limits, they would have to pay above the insurance limits, which they hate doing. This is an example of just that, where the insurance available limits in this case were $1 million. This truck that a truck driver was driving hit my client who was on a motorcycle. Now, the value of my client's claim was about $445,000, and it took 11 months to settle. But one of the reasons why it took that time to settle was because the limits, $1 million limits, were a lot higher than the $445,000 value of the case, so the insurance company did not have a lot of pressure to quickly settle the case. The client treated for 11 months, and it settled right around that time. Another factor that allowed that claim to settle within 11 months and not much longer was the fact that the liability on the other driver was pretty good, meaning the other driver was largely at fault. The other driver was driving a truck. My client was coming in the opposite direction. The truck failed to yield the right of way, made a left. They collided. My client flew off the motorcycle. He suffered a tibial plateau fracture with surgery. He also fractured a finger, had a pin put in. The pin was later removed from his finger. Now, one factor that can affect the time it takes to settle a case is if the insurance company, such as the insurer of the truck in that case, now AIG, has in-house attorneys, meaning there's attorneys already on their staff that they're already paying. That can prolong the time it takes to settle a case, because when you're negotiating with the insurance company, they know if settlement can't be reached, they don't have to hire outside attorneys and pay them more money. Another factor that affects the time that it takes to settle a case is the last date of your medical treatment. In this case, I said the case settled around 11 months after the accident. One of the reasons why it took that amount of time to settle in order to get fair value for my client's case was we needed to wait till he was finished treating. If you don't wait till you're finished treating and you settle the case, you're not going to get full value in most cases of the case. One thing that may be able to help your case settle sooner is if you're dealing with a good insurance company. In that case, the insurance company is now AIG. They have a very good reputation for fairly paying claims. So that case settled, like I said, in about 11 months. However, had we drawn a worse insurance company, such as Progressive, who pays claims worse than AIG, the time it took to settle and get fair value for the case may have taken longer because they, around that same time, would have likely offered less money. Another factor that can affect the time it takes to settle a case is whether the insurance adjuster has all of your medical records, bills, and other documentation that you need to get fair value for your case, or to try to get fair value for your case. What happens is the adjuster needs to have all this medical information, records, bills, MRI films, all that stuff, lost wage information, a lot more, so that they can evaluate the case, write down in their system how much they think it's worth, gets sent up to their supervisor who has to sign off of it. The larger the case, the more levels it has to go up. The smaller the case, sometimes adjusters have authority to settle the case on their own, usually about $10,000 or less. But if you wait to give the insurance adjuster all of your bills and other documentation, all you're doing is you're going to prolong the time it takes to settle to get fair value in most cases. Now, remember, when you go to the hospital, you have a hospital bill, radiology bill, emergency physician's bill. All these bills are separate. You need to get the crash report, the fire rescue report. You need to get all these documents. Otherwise, there's a good chance you're going to get less money, and the time it takes to settle your case is going to take longer. Help the adjuster help you get money for your case quickly. Also, the sooner you get the adjuster medical records and bills, the sooner they can set the reserve, which is the amount of money they're setting aside to pay you for your case. Reserves take time to get changed. So if there's a new development in your case, it takes time for the insurance company to assign more money, to put aside more money for your case. That's another reason to get this adjuster all your records as soon as possible. On the other hand, if your case is worth more than the insurance company limits, that puts significant pressure on the insurance company to settle your case, at least in Florida. This is a MRI of a tibia fracture, the lower leg fracture. The tibia is this long, big bone right there. And the case value was worth about $325,000, the total case, but certain parts of the claim, which I'm going to get into in a second, settled rather quickly because the value of the case was a lot higher than the available insurance limits. If the insurance company doesn't settle within the limits and your case is worth more than the limits, they can face excess exposure and have to pay above the policy limit if they could have and should have settled within the policy limits. This is the car from the case I was describing where my client fractured his tibia, his lower leg, and had a rod put in it. In that case, the value of the claim was somewhere around $225,000, and the rental car driver had $100,000 of liability insurance. The fact that his claim was worth more than the $100,000 limits put pressure on Philadelphia Insurance Company, who was the insurer for the rental car, to pay the case. They wanted to just pay the $100,000 and get out of the case, and that case settled just within a few months of me representing the gentleman. But again, the main reason it settled so quickly was because the value of the case was here and the insurance limits were less. In that same case, when my client had rented the rental car, he purchased $100,000 of uninsured motorist insurance. Same scenario. My client's case was worth $225,000. The uninsured motorist limits were $100,000. They hesitated in paying. I filed a civil remedy notice, which is what you need to do in Florida in order to make the insurance company pay more than the limits if they could have and should have settled within the limits and your case is worth above the limits. And it was only after I did that where they hired an attorney and they decided it was in their best interest to pay. But that case also, that part of the claim also settled within just a few months of me representing him. The third part of that case was against the United States, the federal government. And the reason why that case took several months to settle was because against the United States, if you have a claim, you need to wait 6 months for them to deny or offer to pay the claim before you can sue. So they didn't even make an offer within the first 6 months. We sued them. Just understand that if your case is against the federal government or the state of Florida or a city, the case may take longer to settle because they generally have 6 months to make an offer and you cannot sue within that time. Slip and fall cases may take longer to settle because most businesses, which is where most people slip and fall and have a personal injury claim, have high insurance limits, usually around $1 million or more, and most cases are worth significantly under $1 million. This is an actual photo that was taken in a slip and fall case at a supermarket that we settled for $300,000, but it took 2 years or so to settle the case. And again, the reason why it took so long was my client had not finished treating, so he had a lot of treatment. And again, like I said earlier, you want to wait until your treatment is done in most cases before you settle the case, unless the insurance limits are very low. But again, supermarket slip and fall cases or any accident case at a business can generally take longer to settle because they have that $1 million insurance limit. His case was worth $300,000, which is what we settled at it. A lot less than $1 million. The insurance company did not face any bad faith exposure if they failed to pay. In this case, the gentleman claimed that this fall aggravated a pre-existing Achilles tendon, which is right there, tear, which became worse from the accident. And he ended up needing 2 skin grafts. If you're dealing with a large company like Publix, Winn-Dixie, Disney, Costco, or any other large company, there's a chance that the case is going to take longer to settle because these companies are likely self-insured, meaning they pay the money out of their own pocket, which they don't like doing generally, and it may take longer to settle that case, as opposed to insurance companies are used to paying from the insurance premiums. They've been paid for the premiums for the insurance, so they generally are more willing to pay out cases sooner, all things equal. In that supermarket case that I was discussing, the supermarket denied liability, so we filed a lawsuit, which again, I mentioned that generally delays settlement, although it's generally in your best interest in certain times to file a lawsuit. But regardless, my client still had a lot of time treating, and you remember earlier on I said, you need to wait generally, if there's high insurance limits, to complete your treatment before settling in order to get fair value. This is the truck that rear-ended my client in a case that settled for $210,000. It took a little less than 2 years to settle. One of the reasons why it took under 2 years to settle, or close to 2 years to settle the case, was because the insurance limits were $2 million or so, and my client's injury was worth about $200,000 or so. He claimed that the truck accident caused a tear in his labrum, which is right there, or it aggravated his labrum pre-existing injury. He also claimed a herniated disc from the accident, but another reason why it took so long to settle was because his treatment was over a year. Now, in that case, I said that the insurance policy limits were $2 million or so, but the company that caused the accident had what's called a self-insured retention, meaning they pay the first $250,000 or so. So my client had personal uninsured motorist insurance on his vehicle. We made a claim against that uninsured motorist insurance for $10,000. Progressive was the insurer. They initially refused to pay, saying there's plenty of insurance from the truck. I said that the truck, due to the fact there was a self-insured retention, is considered uninsured under Florida law. I demanded that they pay. I sent them a civil remedy notice, which I filed. After them first arguing and telling me that I had no right to make the claim, they paid the $10,000 very quickly. I settled another case that took 21 months to settle for $210,000, where my client was eating at a restaurant. The booth tipped up and he fell to the floor. We claimed that the booth should have been secure, and he fractured his scaphoid, which is a bone in the wrist right there. He ultimately needed 2 surgeries, but one of the reasons why that case took 21 months to settle was he treated for a very long time, over a year, and also the fact that the insurance limits were very high. They were $1 million, and the value of his case was $210,000, which didn't put any pressure on the insurance company to pay quickly. Another reason that it may have taken 21 months or so to settle was because in any case where you're injured, you need to prove that the restaurant or any premises or anyone who was responsible for your injury, that they were negligent, that they were careless. And we needed to establish that the restaurant knew or should have known that the booth had a problem with it prior to the incident. Now, although the restaurant had surveillance, as you can see through the video, the yellow part that's highlighted, that is my client on the floor, you can see that the surveillance was very, very poor. So before the insurance company paid out $210,000, they wanted to get my client's testimony of what happened, rather than just paying out the money. Now, had the surveillance been very clear and showed exactly what happened, that may have resulted in a sooner settlement. Another thing that may cause a case to settle sooner is if you file a lawsuit and you set the case for trial and get a trial date. As the trial date approaches closer and closer, the case becomes more real to the insurance company, and they have a fear of getting a verdict against their client at trial and having to pay it. This case settled for $210,000 1 month before trial. Now, this is just a stock photo, but the bottom line is the insurance company started to feel the heat because the trial date was quickly approaching. This is a car that my client was driving in a case when another car blew a red light and T-boned her. She fractured the larger bone in her forearm and had to have surgery. The at-fault driver had a personal insurance policy of $100,000. Now, my client's case was worth $200,000. The other driver had a $100,000 policy. This put pressure on USAA, the other driver's personal auto insurer, to settle the case. Now, the driver of the other car was working at the time of the accident, so she had, through her employer, a $1 million policy. And like I said, the value of my client's case was $200,000. So to get that extra $100,000 took several months because the limit was so high of Old Dominion, who was the employer's insurer. Old Dominion's insurance policy of $1 million was so much higher than the $200,000 value of the case, they faced very little pressure to settle quickly. Cruise ship accident cases may take longer to settle because the cruise ship is paying out of its pocket for generally all of your claim or most of your claim, and then they have large insurance policies, so there's no bad faith pressure that they experience. In cruise cases, they generally have their own lawyers that they're already paying a salary to, so they don't have the fear of, if you file a lawsuit, having to pay an outside attorney and pay them by the hour. Although as cruise cases progress, they may hire outside attorneys to represent them. When your health insurance or Medicare or Medicaid pays money for your case, they're entitled generally to get the money back, or at least some of the money back. You need to know what that lien amount is so that you can A, provide it to the insurance adjuster who's ultimately going to be paying you, but also so you know how much you're going to receive in your pocket. If you don't know that lien, you could settle the case and the lien could eat up the entire settlement, which is what you don't want. So not knowing the lien can delay the time it takes to settle a case. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like the video. Please comment. Let me know what you liked about the video, what you don't, if you agree with what I said, if you disagree with what I said. Please watch our other videos. My name is Justin Ziegler of JZ Helps, a Florida injury law firm with my office in Miami. Have a great day.